I was 54 years old when they told me I was their real daughter. Married, 3 kids. The day I went back, before I even saw my elderly parents, I overheard a conversation between my younger brother and the woman who had lived my life. I have no idea why they're bringing her back, her and those brats. She's been out there for decades, he said. Who knows what kind of person she's become, she replied. Who did she marry? What kind of weirdos did she give birth to? You're the only sister I've ever had, he said. Brats? Weirdos? You mean my son, who became a national sensation in his 20s, I thought to myself. Or my twin daughters, who got into the most elite university program in the country before they were even old enough to drive. I was 54 years old when the police called to tell me they had finally found my biological parents. I froze when I heard it. I had known I was adopted since I was 20. My adoptive parents told me they found me as a newborn, just a few days old. At first, they tried to locate my family, leaving my information in the National DNA database. But after years of silence, they went through the proper channels and made me their daughter, legally and with all their heart. Now, decades later, they told me I came from a rich and powerful family. But why would a family like that abandon their child? There had to be more to the story. My husband was away on a business trip in Italy. My son was in the middle of a North American tour. So it was my daughters, my 17-year-old twins, who took time off from school to come with me and meet the people I was related to by blood. Mom, is this for real? For real? They wouldn't stop chattering from the moment we got out of the car. All I heard was, Mom, this, Mom, that, filling my ears like a constant chorus. Fate is that funny. When my son was 8 years old, my husband and I decided to try for a second child, ideally a girl. But we thought another boy would be fine too. Then came the ultrasound. Twins. And almost 40 years old, the pregnancy had me nervous the whole time. I was terrified something would go wrong, and I was even more terrified of ending up with 3 kids. That's not a family, that's a dog pack. But we were lucky. 2 girls. Tall, but sweet. Raising 3 brilliant and beautiful children wasn't easy. It took a lot out of me. But I did it. And they turned out more than well. When my son was little, his aunt, my husband's sister, an active actress, took him to a movie set just for fun. A director saw him, liked his look, and gave him a small part. One job led to another, and soon the offers just kept coming in. My husband and I saw how much he enjoyed it, so we let him go for it. Why not? We thought it would be good for him to explore different paths, artistic, academic, athletic. Let him grow in every way. Over time, he learned more skills, singing, dancing, acting. Today, he does it all. As for the girls, they take after me and their dad. They are bold. They're not just smart, like good students. They far exceed their peers. They've been skipping grades since elementary school. Now they are both enrolled in the elite scholarship program at one of the top universities in the country. Mrs. Cavington, your car is ready. The driver sent to me by my biological parents. The car? A luxury model, of course. Etla and Zoe have been in plenty of cars in that price range, but still they were excited, taking in every detail and chattering non-stop. Mum, Isla nudged me. You're about to meet your real parents. And they're like millionaires. Aren't you getting hysterical? They were kids, after all. They'd been buried in schoolwork for weeks. This was their first excuse in a long time to get out and have some fun. For them, this Davenport family was just one more stop on an adventure. They treated us as if we were guests at a luxury estate. But from an adult perspective, if they really cared, if this meeting mattered, they would have sent more than just a driver. Sebastian had texted me earlier, asking if I'd made it to the Davenport's house. He also sent me some documents about the family, background, social ties, media mentions. A classic Sebastian move. At the end of the message, several photographs were attached, handbags. He wanted to know which ones I didn't like, so he could rule them out for the gift he was planning to bring back from his trip. It was clear that this whole reunion thing wasn't a big deal to any of us. Maybe if it had happened in my 20s, I would have felt sensitive, even conflicted. But I'm 54 years old. The people who raised me, who found me wrapped in a diaper and helpless, took me in, gave me a name, a home, and a life, are no longer here. They died without knowing if someone would ever come looking for me. They were my true parents. No quotation marks needed. I had already built another life, another family, and any weight this return to the roots once carried had dissolved with the passing of the years. The Davenport estate loomed before us. The car pulled up. My daughters and I got out. The man waiting for us was the family butler. He looked at me, a flash of surprise in his eyes, but he said nothing. "This way, Mrs. Davenport," he said. That title made me think. Just a few minutes ago, the driver had called me Mrs. Cavington. Now I was Mrs. Davenport. Interesting. Even more curious was the path we were taking. Not to the main hall, where guests were usually received, but down a side path, toward what looked like a secondary wing of the estate. We hadn't even reached the door when voices were heard in the hallway. "I still don't understand why the old man and the old woman insist on bringing her and those brats back," said the voice. "She's been out there for decades. Who knows what kind of person she became, who she married, and what kind of mutant brats she had." "One sister is enough," the voice continued. "If word gets out, do you know how that will affect the Davenport name?" The butler coughed, deliberately and pointedly. The voices cut off instantly. They led me to formally meet the people I was related to by blood. 3 of them were waiting. David Davenport, my younger brother, turns 46 this year. I had seen his photo before, but in person, he looked the product of a wealthy family, refined, serene, the face of a man raised to inherit and expand generational wealth. Next to him sat Grace Davenport, the woman who had unknowingly lived the life that was meant to be mine. She was elegant, as most high society women are, understated but deliberate, a perfect posture, calm confidence, pearls where they should be. The young woman beside her was probably her daughter, in her 20s, serene like her mother, but with the more accentuated features of a newer generation. Grace. That was the name I was supposed to have. It wasn't bad, but I had never been attached to the idea. I didn't miss the name or the life, and none of this was her fault. The fault lay with someone else, her biological mother. As I had been told, she was an intimate friend of Eleanor, my biological mother, decades ago. When Eleanor was happily married and expecting her first daughter, me, her friend's life fell apart. A romantic breakup, a pregnancy, and the loss of her family fortune. She was desperate to ensure her daughter still had a path to ascend, that she belonged in a powerful place. And so, when Grace was born, shortly after me, somehow, the babies were switched. The details were never clear. What I do know is that this woman took me with no intention of raising me. I was abandoned almost immediately. And now, all these years later, the truth was exposed. But what changed? 54 years had passed, more than half a lifetime. Grace's mother had long since emigrated and passed away a few years before. When I walked into the room with my daughters by my side, I watched the 3 of them as they received us. Their eyes slowly scanned us, and in them I saw it. That unmistakable flash of surprise. They hadn't done their homework. They were expecting a simple, bitter woman, someone worn down by years of hardship, burdened by resentment or regret. Instead, they found me, confident, serene, surrounded by two brilliant and beautiful daughters. Whatever story they had told themselves about the sister who disappeared into the unknown, I was not it, and I didn't need their validation to feel complete. I felt proud of the life I had lived, and I wouldn't trade it for theirs. "Excuse me," I said in a calm voice, breaking the silence as our mutual appraisal lingered in the air. "Aren't Mr. Benjamin Davenport and his wife here today?" To be honest, they were the ones I wanted to see. My biological parents, not the siblings I never knew, or those who took my place or built their lives around my absence. Even though the siblings had cut their conversation short before, they didn't seem too concerned about whether I had heard anything. That silent sense of entitlement, the one that comes from always assuming you're on the right side of the table, wasn't new to me. I had seen it many times, especially when I was young and at the beginning of my career. But nowadays, it's a rare thing. Most people no longer look at me or my children that way. "Our parents aren't well. They're still at the recovery center, but they should be back soon," my brother David finally said, his tone polite but distant. He looked at me with a certain practiced formality and added, "I'm David, your biological younger brother." He pointed to the two women next to him. "These are our sister Grace and her daughter Blair." Everything felt off, like a play with a bad cast, where everyone had their lines down, but no one believed in the script. For a moment, no one moved, just a 2-second awkward pause that stretched out longer than it should have. Then Grace stood up. She walked across the room and took my hand. Her voice softened, laced with compassion. "Sister, you've been through so much." My eyes settled on her hand, perfectly manicured, wrapped in designer elegance, a diamond ring the size of a quail's egg, catching the light as if it had something to prove. I looked at my own hand. My wedding ring was simple, no stones, just a plain, simple band that had been there for more than 30 years. No, I hadn't suffered. But the truth behind my past, the strange web of abandonment and replacement, left a strange feeling in my chest. Not pain, just discomfort. A feeling of being misplaced in my own story. "This is your aunt and your cousins, Blair. Say hello," Grace said to her daughter, still clutching my hand as if we were recreating a tearful soap opera reunion. Blair looked me up and down. Her outfit was impeccable. Her posture, too. Yet her expression was one of deep indifference. "Hi," she said flatly. Her eyes never met mine. The arrogance wasn't subtle. It didn't have to be. Her mother might have been the imposter. But Blair? She was authentic. Born with that name, raised with it, molded by it. She didn't see me as family. She barely saw me. The Davenport family was, without a doubt, one of the wealthiest in the region. Old money, high society, one of those last names that opened doors without knocking. Grace's husband, naturally, came from an equally refined lineage. They matched perfectly on paper and in pedigree. Today, the family reins were largely in David's hands, and he made sure to play his part. "We'll host a welcome dinner for you tonight," he said with calm authority. "The butler will show you to your rooms so you can rest for now." But he asked me to stay for a moment after the others had left the room. He turned to me with what I assumed was meant to be sincerity. "Whatever happened in the past is in the past," he said. "Grace is a victim too. None of us knew the truth. If Mum and Dad hadn't decided, on a whim, to have the whole family DNA tested this year, we would still be in the dark." He explained how, as soon as my biological parents discovered the girl they raised wasn't their blood, they contacted the authorities and filed a report. Since my DNA had been in the national database for years, the system identified us quickly. Too quickly, really. The whole process was surprisingly efficient, almost eerily easy, especially when you think about how many families lose their children and never see them again. She's been our sister since day one, David continued, speaking of Grace. She's a Davenport, through and through. She married into the Caldwell family. She's lived that life. It wasn't her fault. This was her biological mother's doing. Their bond, without a doubt, was strong. Siblings raised together, decades of shared history and loyalty. I gave him a slight smile and asked softly, "You say she's a victim? Tell me, what exactly did she lose?" David's mouth opened. He closed it. There was no answer. I was the one who was abandoned. I was the one who almost died. That was all I said out loud. But the list was much longer in my mind. She lived the life that was meant for me, wrapped in silk, raised by loving parents, with opportunities most only dream of. She had a family, an identity, a safety net. She held a place in a world that should have been mine. Not out of malice, perhaps. But reality is reality. For 54 years, she lived in the nest that was supposed to be mine. And a life isn't infinite. Many people never make it to 54. Many live their entire lives waiting for a truth that never comes. If I had lived a life of suffering, if I had just survived, without love or support, what would this truth have been then? A gift or a final insult? Even now, with a life I'm proud of, with love and success and children who bring me joy, does that make up for the damage done to me? Does my survival somehow absolve them of what they denied me? This is the question no one dares to ask, and the one they can never answer. It was early in the afternoon when I finally met my biological parents, and the moment I saw them, I understood why David and Grace had seemed so stunned when we met. I look like her. Eleanor. Even after all these years, even with the passage of time etching fine lines on her face, the resemblance was undeniable. I could see myself, 20 or 30 years from now, in the shape of her features, the curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. "Michelle," my daughter whispered, her hand trembling as she stroked my cheek. My father was beside her, watching me in silence, inquisitive. We didn't need DNA tests. Our faces were enough. The whole moment felt like it was out of a movie. Dim lighting, emotional tension, the return of a long-lost child. I didn't go looking for tears. I thought I didn't care. But still, something in my chest constricted. Something old and unsaid stirred. I was curious, of course, especially about Eleanor. Her face, aged and elegant, held a kind of silent hope, the kind that hurts. She wanted to believe that I had been raised well, that the woman who kidnapped me, her old friend, the one responsible for all this, had at least given me a good life. That, maybe, the damage hadn't been so bad. "My adoptive parents found me in a rural area just outside the city," I said calmly. "I was barely alive when they picked me up." The room shifted. I saw it, the flash on their faces. Understanding, horror, shame. Grace's mother, it was now clear, had not stolen me out of love or desperation. She never intended to raise me. She didn't even care if I lived. She had taken me to erase me from the map, to clear the way for her daughter, and she almost succeeded. Grace and her daughter were not present for this conversation. How convenient. I kept my story simple, brief, nothing dramatic, just the broad strokes. I was taken in, raised by kind people. I studied, I worked, I got married, I had kids. Nothing ostentatious, nothing far-fetched. To them, I imagine it sounded like a normal life. But maybe that made it harder. Because even in its simplicity, it was a life I had to build from nothing, while Grace had been handed mine as if it were a birthright. They didn't say it out loud, but I felt it. They hadn't expected their real daughter to turn out like me. Michelle, I know you've had a difficult life. Benjamin Davenport, my biological father, finally said, his voice grave but measured. But this is not something we can make public. Letting it out to the world would only generate scandal and gossip. He paused, looked at Eleanor, and then back at me. Grace may not be our blood daughter, but she has been a part of this family for decades. She is now married to a member of the Caldwell family, and her biological mother is no longer here. If this story comes out, it could affect both families. Then, as if making a generous offer, he added, "What we can do is tell people that we feel a special connection to you, say it's fate, and say we're taking you in as a goddaughter. That way, we will also bring your children into the family. As for compensation, your mother and I will take care of that privately. What do you think?" I didn't even have time to process the insult before Isla, my daughter, spoke up. "If you weren't planning on recognizing my mum, then why bother bringing her back in the first place?" Her tone was sharp, and her face was a mirror of mine when it was done being polite. She and Zoe had been talking in hushed tones about the Davenports all afternoon. It was clear their patience had run out. David's voice cut the air. "Since when do children interrupt adults? Where are your manners?" There it was. He didn't just disrespect my daughter, he dismissed her. "Did you just dismiss me?" Zoe didn't take it lightly. "Does her behavior bother you but not your family's injustice?" She retorted. "My mother was the one who was wronged, and you only care about protecting the one who replaced her?" David's expression soured, his pride clearly wounded. He stood up abruptly, his eyes narrowed at me. "Michelle, is this how you've raised your daughters?" I looked him in the eyes, calm and firm. "Yes, I raised them well. Well enough not to stay quiet when their mother is disrespected." I tilted my head slightly. "And you? What gives you the right to correct them?" "Uncle?" I turned to Eleanor and Benjamin. "I wasn't raised by my biological parents, and my daughters certainly haven't received an ounce of your care or attention. We came today as guests, uninvited, it seems. If anything, we are owed courtesy, not lectures disguised as authority." One sentence. That was all it took for their faces to turn pale, then red, then pale again. The truth, when it lands cleanly, doesn't need to be shouted. It just has to be undeniable. "David, apologize to your sister." Benjamin's voice cracked like a whip. "Being over 40 and being scolded by your father, especially in front of strangers, clearly didn't sit well with the heir to the Davenport family." David stiffened, his jaw tight, his pride bruised. "What did I say that wasn't true?" he muttered, his tone icy. "None of this is our fault. We've been lied to." If she's so full of resentment, why bother coming back? Why indeed? It was a fair question, though not in the way he meant it. I didn't bother to argue whether David owed me an apology. Instead, I focused my attention on the two people still in front of me, the ones who had called me daughter in a trembling voice and sentimental expressions less than an hour ago. "I would like to ask," I said, calm and direct, "what exactly did you mean by prior compensation?" David's expression changed instantly. There it was, that of course look. As if he had been waiting for the moment when I would prove to him that I was just as he supposed, greedy, bitter, transactional. His contempt wasn't subtle. But Eleanor and Benjamin held their composure. Eleanor reached into her purse and took out 2 cards. "Michelle," she said sweetly, "this card has $1 million. You can use it however you want. The second is a supplementary card to my account. You can use it freely for your daily expenses. And if you prefer not to move in with us, we will gladly buy you a house nearby. For you and the girls. 1 million. A black card. Real estate. For the average person, that's a life-changing generosity. But one look at David was enough to see what this meant within the family. That money, it was a pittance. The car they sent to pick me up earlier probably cost more. Compared to everything they had invested in raising Grace, the elite education, the luxury, the influence, the secure future from day one, it was ridiculous. They searched my face for gratitude. Maybe surprise, emotion at the very least. They found none. I smiled politely, not coldly, not mockingly, just with sincerity. "I assumed," I said, "that the compensation was closer to what your other children received. For example, a stake, a share in the family business." David could no longer stay still. "Michelle, don't be greedy," he blurted out. "You just got back and you're already asking for shares." I arched an eyebrow. "Aren't they mine by right? From what I hear, Grace has 5%. Should I receive less than her?" He turned to our parents, outraged. "See? I told you she came back for the Davenport money." I laughed. "If you're not worried about the money, why are you so nervous? You?" I didn't let him finish, because I knew exactly what was behind that explosive temper. I had done my research. The Davenport family was still under Benjamin's firm control. Despite David being positioned as the heir, most of the shares had not yet changed hands. Grace, while technically part of the company, only had a symbolic position. Her stake was small, just enough to save face, no matter what. Benjamin had never truly considered her his successor. Bringing me back, complicated thing. One more mouth at the table, one more name on the paperwork. Grace had no right to protest, not now that the truth was out. But David had everything to lose, and nothing shakes people up as much as the idea of cutting a smaller slice from a pie they thought they already owned. "Enough," Benjamin finally said. "Michelle, keep what we've given you for now. The rest, these things take time. For now, let's focus on the welcome dinner." It was a dismissal disguised as diplomacy. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. He left the offer floating in the air like a gold coin just out of reach, bright enough to distract, vague enough to avoid commitment. The dinner that night turned out to be a private family dinner. Discreet. Intimate. Exactly what you'd expect from people trying to keep a scandal a secret. No announcements, no press, no toasts to lost daughters. They weren't planning on revealing who I was. And they certainly weren't planning on revealing who Grace wasn't. Benjamin and Eleanor were getting older, and like all aging parents, they clung to the comfort of finally having their real daughter and granddaughters back. The 3 of us looked polished and respectable enough to fit the part, but wanting both sentiment and silence, to get their lost child back and keep their family's perfect image intact. That was the kind of illusion only the rich could afford. Because you can't have both. You don't get true daughters and clean slates, not after 54 years, not without paying the cost. I looked around the table, observing the faces of those present. In addition to my biological parents, there were David and his family, his wife and their teenage son, along with Grace and her husband Nathaniel Caldwell, the current head of the Caldwell family. Their daughter Blair was seated with them, dressed perfectly, observing everything intently without saying much. And then there was me, with my 2 daughters. Isla, and Zoe, completely at ease. Not a hint of being fazed by the tension in the room or the unspoken hostility. That confidence came from their nature and the life they had grown up in. They were used to being surrounded by wealth, by scrutiny, by rooms full of people who smiled with their mouths but not with their eyes. This was nothing new. The Davenports had made their decision clear. Grace's identity would remain intact, partly for appearances, but mostly because of the Caldwells. 2 decades of marriage, a child, and countless shared interests tied the families together. Even now, in their 50s, Grace and Nathaniel were more than a couple. They were an institution. Whatever love there had been at the beginning, the union had been strategic and calculated. The kind of union where names mattered and history was currency. Revealing that Grace had never been a Davenport would be humiliating for both families. Scandalous, risky. It would destroy a carefully preserved legacy. So the most convenient path was simple. Preserve the lie, protect Grace, and quietly place me in a secondary role, acknowledge just enough to calm the guilt, but not enough to disrupt the balance of power. They chose to keep things orderly, leaving the uncomfortable truth on the sidelines. Me. At 54, I was not easy to appease. I didn't have the softness of youth or the blind hope that family would fix everything. I had lived too much, lost too much, and built too much on my own to be naive. They couldn't sell me fairy tales, not anymore. The dinner itself was a study in discomfort and cost. Impeccable cuisine, gleaming silverware, wine that probably cost more than some people's rent, all under the pretense of a celebration. It was a play, carefully choreographed, with everyone performing their part. A joyful reunion on the surface, a damage control meeting underneath. David and his wife didn't even pretend to like us. Their son sat next to Blair, hand in glove, whispering and smiling with the subtlety of entitled teenagers. They were aligned, clearly. The message was unspoken, but clear. I might be blood, but I wasn't one of them, and they were betting I never would be. As for Grace's identity, it really didn't matter anymore. Not to her, not to the Davenports. She knew exactly where she stood. She knew that being exposed as not the biological daughter of Benjamin and Eleanor would cost her nothing. Not after more than 50 years. Not with the Caldwell name behind her. Not with a daughter born into power and a husband who still wielded real influence. So no, my return didn't scare her. It barely registered. And since she didn't feel threatened, they didn't bother to pretend they cared about me, the so-called real daughter. "Michelle," Grace said, in her usual soft, refined voice. "I heard you have a husband and a son too. This is such a big moment for your family. Why didn't they come?" I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth, and every eye at the table was suddenly on me. "They are very busy with work," I said calmly. "They couldn't get away on such short notice." "Work?" This came from Linda, David's wife. Her tone was pure innocence and disbelief. "But your son is only 25 years old, isn't he? Is he already working full-time? Didn't he continue his studies?" "That's right," I replied. "He graduated early and didn't continue his studies. I wasn't ashamed of that. Not for a second. But I caught the barely concealed smile that was exchanged by some. That familiar purse of the lips, the raised eyebrow. The look that the rich get when someone goes off their script. "A young man doesn't need to go to work so early," Linda offered with feigned kindness. "If he's free, why don't we bring him into the family business? We can find him a position." That's when Blair spoke. The Caldwell's daughter, Grace's well-educated, well-mannered heir, silent all night until now. "Doesn't Uncle David's company only recruit postgraduates these days?" Blair said. David caught her cue. "Well, he said with a slight laugh. Some departments still take people without college degrees. I don't know if Michelle would be comfortable with that. But hey, if it's difficult, maybe we can include her husband too. There's always room somewhere. A soft laugh, two mocking glances, and every word was steeped in that same syrupy condescension. I looked towards Benjamin and Eleanor, almost expecting them to intervene with something more than words. But they didn't. They offered some token scolding, soft, "That's enough," and "Don't be rude." Performative, hollow, the kind of discipline that ends with a wink when no one is looking. I smiled, coldly, controlled. "No need," I said, putting my fork down carefully. "They're doing just fine on their own. We wouldn't want to interrupt their progress, would we? Dragging them to places they're clearly not welcome." After that brief exchange about my husband and son, the table changed the subject quickly, as expected. A subject change, carefully orchestrated, like turning a page of a script that was getting too uncomfortable. This time it was Blair's birthday. Of course, the Caldwell family's only daughter wouldn't just get cake and flowers. The celebration would be extravagant, meticulously organized by Blair herself. She already had a guest list packed with influencers and celebrities, but some names, more well-known, were proving harder to get. She was about to beg her parents, her voice on the verge of a whine, when Grace gave in with a gentle, indulgent smile. "Okay, darling. I'll see what I can do." "Thank you. Please get Rhys to come," Blair said. "He's almost impossible to get, and his tour just happens to be coming through here at almost the same time. I've already told my friends he's coming. If he doesn't, it will be humiliating." Rhys. The name hung in the air like an unexpected chord. Ela, Zoe, and I exchanged a quick glance, unspoken, subtle, but definitely amused. "What are the odds?" Nathaniel sat nearby, indifferent to the request, but added in a dry tone, "It's okay to follow a celebrity, Blair, but don't you dare date one." "Dad," Blair rolled her eyes. "Lily is the one who's obsessed with him. You were the one who said I should get closer to her." Nathaniel let it go. He knew where to push and where to give in. His position in the Davenport family was solid. He was Benjamin's favorite son-in-law and got along quite well with David, probably bonding over board meetings and bottom lines. Then, at just the right moment, David chimed in with exaggerated surprise, as if he had just discovered a juicy secret. "Nathaniel, wait. Are you working with Apex Global?" And now that name. That name landed even heavier than Rhys. I recognized it instantly. "My daughters, too. I'm not working with them," Nathaniel replied softly. "I've heard they're sending people for a round of business meetings in the region, just trying to open a door or two." Nothing confirmed. He was vague. Too vague. Nathaniel was clearly playing his cards close to his chest, which told me one thing. He had more at stake with Apex Global than he was letting on. But no one pushed. Not here. Not tonight. No one was going to accuse a Caldwell of being cagey. Meanwhile, David kept up the flattery. "If you get Apex Global, that's huge. Your board will love you. You'd have the whole room eating out of your hand." Apex Global. Founded just over 2 decades ago, the company had gone through an explosive period of growth about 10 years ago, scaled quickly, went public even faster, and had been growing like a rocket ever since. At the table, Isla and Zoe were trying to hold back laughter. But under the table, I could feel the commotion, one sister furiously stomping on the other's shoe to keep her from breaking the dam. If I hadn't been holding back a smile, maybe I would have joined them. Then Eleanor chimed in, with a soft, sweet tone. "Isla, Zoe, would you like to transfer to a school here? The academic resources in this area are very good. Before I could answer, someone else chimed in. Linda, Mum, the schools here are excellent, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But are you sure the girls could keep up? I mean, if they fall behind or drop in rank, it could really affect their confidence, don't you think? She seemed so concerned, so kind on the surface. But that concern was as fake as the diamonds she wore in her ears. Linda didn't want my daughters near her son. That was obvious. Not in the classroom, not in the family, not even on the same campus. I smiled, calmly, coldly. No need, I said lightly. A transfer wouldn't make sense at this point. Why really, eh? Who transfers to high school after already being enrolled in a top-tier university? Linda looked smug, and her lips curled slightly. Of course. I thought Michelle would be a realist. Of course she would. She could keep pretending that the only reason she didn't want my daughters around was a concern for their academic adjustment. But the truth was simpler and clearer. She didn't want her precious son rubbing elbows with new money girls, with blood ties, but no social background. After dinner, Eleanor, with the thoughtless presumption of someone accustomed to being the hostess and matriarch, prepared our accommodations. She insisted we spend the night there, as if it were something natural, normal, familiar. Grace's old bedroom had been carefully preserved like a museum piece. Her daughter Blair also had her own permanent room in the mansion. Comfortable, personalized. And me and my daughters? At the last minute they cleared out 2 guest rooms. To be fair, they offered Isla and Zoe separate rooms. But the girls looked at each other, exchanged glances, and made a quiet, unanimous decision. One room was enough. They had a lot to say. Once the bedroom door closed behind them, it was open season. The family WhatsApp group detonated. Message after message, meme after meme. Screenshots, jokes, live commentary on the facial expressions at dinner, recaps of passive-aggressive comments, and a full analysis of Blair's attitude. When Sebastian and Reese finished their work for the day and opened the group chat, more than 300 unread messages, and not one out of place. Sebastian's call came just as I was getting ready for the night. "How was the first day of your big reunion?" he asked. "Not bad," I said with a slight smile, my gaze fixed on the dark window. The dinner was impressive. On the other end of the phone, his voice softened and sounded amused. "I saw the group chat," he said. "Your daughters seem ready to storm the gates. And you? You're not even fazed?" "They have more fire than I do," I said, half laughing. He talked about a few small things and wrapped it up with the kind of words that always made everything feel simple again. "Michelle, if you're not happy there, come home. I'll be back in a few days." "Okay," I said. It wasn't dramatic, but it grounded me. Not long after I hung up, someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find Grace standing there, in a silk nightgown, soft, expensive, impeccably styled. Her presence radiated a serene elegance, the kind that is more practiced than natural. "Can I help you?" I asked, leaning against the frame. Grace offered me a forced smile. "Michelle, I was hoping we could talk for a moment." "About?" I asked. "Can I come in?" I didn't move. I just arched an eyebrow. "No need," I said. "Whatever you have to say it here." She didn't push. She didn't flinch. "About all this," she said lightly, gesturing vaguely between us. "I know I technically lived your life, but you have to understand that I was just a baby too. None of this was my choice, so blaming me changes nothing." There it was, the clean hand's claim of innocence. Classic. She continued, her tone soft and rehearsed. Let's be realistic. I'm not leaving the Davenports. I'm not leaving the Caldwells. That's just not realistic. But if I were you, I would focus on the opportunity you have. The Davenports still have weight. At your age, Michelle, it makes sense to think about your children's future. Why let pride get in the way of something that could benefit them? They've already seen what this world is like. Are you really going to let them have a taste and then send them back to where they came from? Where they came from? I stared at her. Of all the storms I've weathered in life, this was the first time someone had the audacity to invade my space and then talk as if they were doing me a favor. A squatter with pearls and pedigree. She wasn't apologizing. She was giving a warning disguised as advice. She had no shame at all. After enjoying decades of wealth, comfort, and affection that were never meant for her, Grace still had the nerve to stand outside my door with the air of a benefactor, offering kind advice as if it were a precious favor. It wasn't kindness. It was condescension weaponized. What she called an opportunity, I called an insult. She talked about making the most of what I had, as if I were being given something extra, not something that should have been mine from the beginning. As if I was the lucky one, and she was the generous soul letting me have a taste. The absurdity of it all was almost ridiculous. The most absurd thing was the Davenports' indifference toward me, their supposed real daughter. No background check, no real curiosity, not even a basic attempt to learn about the life I had built, or the man I married, or the children I raised. If they had bothered to look, it wouldn't have been difficult. But they didn't. Why didn't they think it was necessary? To them, I was a surprise. A footnote. A woman from the outside, brought back out of obligation, not affection. I crossed my arms and met Grace's carefully blank expression. Grace, I said in a low but firm voice, I don't know what you thought you'd accomplish by coming here tonight. But let me be clear. Whatever your intentions, you have no right to advise me. Not as a sister. Not as anything. Because no matter how blameless she claimed to be, that didn't obligate me to understand her. I didn't owe her sympathy, and she certainly didn't deserve my silence. She said nothing. She just watched me with an expression that barely hid her disdain. Then she turned and walked away, every inch of her posture still soaked in privilege. That wasn't blood. That was leverage. The kind of relationship that is built on image, marriage, and years of being mistaken for someone she wasn't. She could keep it. It never belonged to her anyway. Meanwhile, in the next room, Isla and Zoe were whispering and laughing into the night, letting out all the sarcasm and frustration they hadn't been able to express during dinner. It was almost dawn when they finally fell asleep. In the morning we were gone. No dramatic announcements, no goodbyes, just a discreet departure. They didn't expect that. The looks on the Davenports' faces when we told them we were leaving. Confused, slightly insulted, vaguely incredulous. They had assumed we would stay, that we would cling like distant relatives, too dazzled by the chandeliers and silverware to walk away. They couldn't imagine that someone could choose to leave their wealth behind, especially someone who had once lived without it. But what they didn't understand, what they never took the time to learn, was that we weren't there to ask for a seat. We already had our own table. Michelle, are you really leaving? Grace's voice followed me into the foyer, measured, but with a hint of disapproval. Aren't you going to stay and spend time with Mum and Dad? They came back from the recovery center just to see you. Mum has been depressed for years before finding you. Then came the next line, sharp and carefully dressed as concern. You can't let your resentment towards me stop you from caring about your true parents. Ah, there it was. The guilt trip. packed with luggage and ready to fly. I have to go back, I said calmly. Isla and Zoe have classes, and I have work. We all have responsibilities, just like everyone else. Benjamin finally spoke, his brows furrowed, clearly irritated. We just gave you $1 million. What job do you need to go back to? Whatever it is, it can't give you anywhere near that. Quit. There's no need. Then, as if the plan were already in motion, he added, Isla and Zoe should transfer to a school here. It might not be the same one as their cousin, but there are plenty of good options in the city. 3 sentences. And just like that, they thought they had mapped out our lives. I reached into my purse and took out the card they had given me the night before. I held it between my fingers. I studied it for a moment. Oh, I said lightly. So this money wasn't compensation. Was it severance for my career? Then I placed the card on the table between us. In that case, I can't accept it. The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop. Eleanor looked startled, even a little hurt. Michelle, your father didn't mean it. It's okay, I said sweetly. Too many years have passed for all of you. There are things that can no longer be undone, and trying to force them only makes them worse. I looked at her and then at Benjamin. We all seem to agree that it's best for things to stay as they are, so let's keep it that way. We'll be like distant relatives, and sometime when I can, I'll bring my husband to visit. I turned to leave. Behind me, Eleanor took a step as if to follow me, but her children moved first. David blocked her path. She's just playing hard to get, he sneered. She's being haughty, so you'll beg her to stay. She wants you to grovel. Then louder, deliberately cruel. You and Dad don't owe her anything. Outside the Davenport estate, my driver was already waiting. The car was not flashy, not the kind that would attract attention in that kind of neighborhood, but it was mine, and that was enough. The truth is, I didn't mind staying a few more days. I've lived long enough to maintain my composure in awkward situations. But Isla and Zoe were only 17, and while they had their mother's character, they also retained the sweetness of youth, the belief that people should say what they mean. They had known true love. They had grown up with a grandmother and a grandfather who spoiled them in the ways that mattered most: gentleness, loyalty, and trust. And because of that, they could spot a fake smile from a mile away. The Davenports, for all their carefully practiced courtesy, hadn't hidden their contempt well. Everyone, except David, managed to show some politeness, but not even golden manners could completely hide what they thought of us. So I took the girls back. I got them settled. I watched them walk into school with the same steady confidence they had when they left. Then I made a call. My assistant answered on the second ring. I asked her to give me an update on Apex Global's active projects and, in particular, to confirm if the Caldwell family's company was still among our potential partners. She hesitated for a moment. Then, Ma'am, is there a problem? Do you want me to fast-track them or take them off the list? Because in this world, that's all it took. A yes or a no. A word from me and entire portfolios changed. After all, I wasn't just the founder of Apex Global. I was the owner, the controller, the woman they were trying to read without realizing they were already on the sidelines of my story. Start by checking who's managing the contact, I said. I want to know if the protocol is clean. I didn't say no, but she had worked with me long enough to understand what that meant. Not long after, a full report landed in my inbox, and just like that, I moved on. The meeting? Done. If something came of it, fine. If not, we would keep our distance and call it good manners. But then, Just a few days later, my phone rang again. Eleanor, my biological mother. She wanted to invite us, to Blair's birthday celebration. She insisted I bring the whole family. Sebastian had just returned from overseas. He waited for me to hang up, half listening as I nodded and gave polite answers. Then, as soon as the line went dead, he let out a dry laugh. Let me get this straight. They want the biological daughter to show up, with her whole family, for the adopted daughter's birthday party? His tone was more bewildered than bitter. Sebastian had seen a lot. He grew up in a stable home, met my adoptive parents in college, and fit into our family as if he were always meant to be there. He never had to learn to measure sincerity by the way people used his name. I still hadn't decided if I would attend, but my husband and my daughters had already decided for me. Sebastian poked me in the arm like a big teenager. Michelle, he said, smiling, take me to see the show. I'm your husband, shouldn't I finally meet your blood relatives? I gave him a look. Sebastian and I were born in the same year. We met almost 40 years ago, fighting for the top spot on the classroom honor roll, deskmates, rivals, and somehow accomplices in life. Back then, it never crossed my mind that the boy I was competing with for every point would one day be the man I would sleep with for the rest of my life. Now, in his 50s, Sebastian still had that same sharpness. No dad bod, no midlife crisis haircut. He looked as if time had forgotten to drag him forward, frozen somewhere between his 40s and forever. Like one of those actors who never age, irritatingly photogenic and somehow more charismatic now than he was in his 20s. Of course, I knew why. He worked at it. Like everything in his life, he refused to just drift. I reached out and jabbed him in the face. Why are you so nosy? You sound like one of those gossipy interns. Was he really trying to connect with my newfound family? No. He just wanted front row seats to the drama. Our son wants to go too, he added, taking my hand and kissing my knuckles like a romantic lead who didn't know we were almost grandparents. I blinked and looked at my phone. Of course he does. In the family group chat, Reese had posted a photo of what looked like an official invitation. He had been sent one, a proper invitation, embossed and ready for the media. Me? I got a phone call, a kind but clear message, telling me the date and time. Come on, Sebastian nudged me. Let's go. I nudged him back. You're too old to beg. Have some shame. Then his lips brushed the side of my neck. Light, teasing, familiar. Honey, he murmured, don't you like being begged? The line was so specific, so rehearsed, that I almost choked on my laughter. A few weeks ago, at a dinner with business partners, someone made the mistake of trying to flatter me, assuming I liked younger men. Without asking, they sent a charming, boy-faced 20-something to me, trying to pass him off as attentive company. He leaned in, too slick to be real, and cooed almost the exact same line. Honey, don't you like being pampered? He wasn't half as handsome as Sebastian used to be, and he wasn't a fraction as interesting either. Worse, the kid had no idea who was standing next to him. Because that night Sebastian had come to pick me up. He walked in, dressed down and unconcerned, with a calm and penetrating gaze. The room changed when he entered, because unlike that boy, my husband didn't try to impress anyone. He didn't need to. He was proof of a simple truth. A Ferrari, even with its age, is still a Ferrari. And the engine, it still runs perfectly. That night, when Sebastian whispered, "Honey," over and over in my ear, as if it were a personal prayer, he didn't stop until I forgot everything I had planned to say. Now, hearing that same word again in broad daylight felt less like a pet name and more like some kind of signal. A button pressed, a game resumed. I tried to push him away, half laughing, half serious, intending to say something sarcastic, but I couldn't do it. Sebastian smiled as if he had already won. "Are you really going to deny a middle-aged man the right to a sex life?" he joked, feigning offense. "Especially when the noisy ones are finally not home." When he said the noisy ones, he was referring to our 3 kids. After the twins were born, Sebastian voluntarily got a vasectomy. He said it with a straight face, too. "My chaye. I love them, but I'm not risking a 4th. They already outnumber us." And yes, despite the chaos, I ended up taking him and the kids to Blair's birthday party, held at a lush, sprawling country estate, like something out of a luxury advertising campaign. The kind of place that whispered, "Old money," and shouted, "Look at me." Technically, it used to be Eleanor's. But it was said that Blair had complained so sweetly that the property had ended up on her birthday gift list. I knew this not because someone told me directly, but because someone, with all their warm family enthusiasm, had decided to add me to the Davenport family group chat. Yes, that chat. The one where they exchanged smiling selfies, shared sugary quotes, and flaunted affection as if it were their second language. A daily dose of blessed to have each other energy. I wish they knew how many times I've scrolled through it with a glass of wine and an arched eyebrow. The facade of the estate looked like a luxury car dealership. Ferraris, Bentleys, Maybachs, Porsches, you name it, it was there. It wasn't subtle. But then again, neither was this family. The Davenports hadn't sent a car for us. Maybe it was a deliberate oversight. Maybe not. It didn't matter. I was no stranger to this kind of scene. I had attended more events like this than I could count, and I usually just asked the driver to bring something discreet, but presentable. But today, Sebastian had ideas. With a twinkle in his eye, like a man preparing for an improv skit, he went to the garage and personally selected the most unassuming car we had. Something that looked like it belonged to a literature professor on sabbatical, not the founder of a global conglomerate. And then, to complete the scene, he insisted on driving it himself. Black sunglasses, sleeves rolled up, one hand on the steering wheel, as if he was ready to shoot a cologne commercial. I didn't argue, if the Davenports wanted to believe we were regular folks. Sebastian was more than willing to play the part. Heck, he might even win an award for it. Sebastian and I had the twins with us, Isla and Zoe, dressed neatly but not ostentatiously, as self-assured and tasteful girls often are. Reese was supposed to arrive later. His schedule was packed, as always. He said he would meet us directly and then go home with us. So it was just the 4 of us when we arrived at the estate. And as expected, after all, we were at a Davenport event. We were stopped at the gate. The security team was professional, even apologetic, but they were firm. "I'm sorry," said the man checking names, looking at us and his tablet. "We were ordered not to let anyone in without a physical invitation." His tone wasn't rude, but the implication was undeniable. No invitation, no entry. I didn't argue. I didn't show my credentials. I didn't mention names. Around us, other guests were being smoothly welcomed. Suits, dresses, jewelry that denoted money or a desire to look like it. Some turned to look at us as they passed, curious, slightly amused. It wasn't uncommon for people to try to crash parties like this, but to drag a whole family to do it. That was unusual. And if we followed the expected script, I should call my mother right now. After all, she had invited us. Grace must have suggested it. But Eleanor had made the decision herself. So I dialed. 1 ring, 2, 3, voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. I exhaled slowly and turned to my family, calm as ever. Okay, I said, picking at an imaginary piece of lint on my sleeve. Looks like we're not needed that much. Let's go home. Sebastian arched an eyebrow but didn't protest. The girls? Their expressions said it all. Seriously? Is this how they do things? We turned and walked a few steps away from the entrance. That's when we heard it. Wait, please don't leave. The voice sounded rushed, out of breath, urgent. We paused and turned. A man in a dark, tailored suit was running down the path toward us, visibly hurried and worried about how what was happening would look. He wasn't security. He was someone high up, probably event staff with instructions to avoid public relations disasters at all costs. His smile was tense and his eyes wide, in apology. "I'm so sorry," he said, panting slightly. "There was a communication problem. It was our fault. No one informed the gate team. You are honored guests. Please, allow me to escort you inside personally." Around us, more guests were arriving, some slowing down just enough to catch a bit of the commotion. They didn't recognize us. Not yet. But they would. I smiled softly but didn't move. "And you are?" The man straightened immediately. "I'm George, the event organizer overseeing Miss Caldwell's birthday celebration." "So you're saying," I continued calmly, "that the Caldwell family invited us, that you were aware, but that, due to an oversight by your team, that information wasn't communicated to the gate staff." He wiped the sweat forming on his forehead. "Yes, completely our fault." Zoe, who never let things slide, tilted her head and smiled playfully. "Sir, I saw you standing there earlier. You looked like you were observing everything." "You didn't seem to be in a hurry then," Isla chimed in sweetly. "And now that you're here on behalf of the Caldwell family, does that mean they were the ones who ordered you to make us wait? Or did you take the initiative on your own?" The questions weren't loud, but the pacing was surgical. Some guests slowed down nearby, pretending not to listen but listening very clearly. George visibly paled. His gaze darted between us and the approaching crowd. Then Sebastian stepped in and naturally gave the final push. "If this is how you treat your guests, maybe you want to include a warning on the invitation next time. Entry not guaranteed." He gave a forced smile. "Maybe we'll save everyone some trouble." George looked as if he had just watched his entire career flash before his eyes. "I sincerely apologize," he said, bowing his head slightly. "It was an oversight on my part. The lady of the house gave specific instructions. You were to be received with the utmost courtesy. Please, I beg you not to let my mistake reflect on the family." He was humbling himself, but not in a pathetic way, just enough to show that he knew where the power resided. It wasn't in the name printed on the door. It was with those who everyone was now watching as they walked through it. Sebastian looked at me wordlessly, waiting for my call. I nodded once. "Okay, lead the way." He exhaled silently in a nod and then took my hand. But the moment we crossed the threshold, a sharp voice cut through the buzzing behind us. "Cavington." I froze. The voice wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. My grip loosened from Sebastian's hand. Then gently I took my daughter's hands and stepped forward without looking back. Quick, light, determined. Behind us, Sebastian was the one intercepted. I didn't even turn around, because who was calling me? They weren't important enough to slow me down. Let them make the introductions. We were already on the guest list. My phone started vibrating as we walked in, dozens of new messages flooding my feed like warning sirens. Accusations, complaints, barely veiled reprimands. Apparently, the fact that I walked away from the gate and let Sebastian handle the awkward scene outside had offended all the right people. Not that I cared. If they recognized him, they most likely recognized me too. They just chose to pretend otherwise. Fine. Let Sebastian handle the public. He was better at that part anyway. I, for my part, was genuinely curious. Why had they invited me? It certainly wasn't out of guilt or some sudden desire to make amends. Not from the Davenports, not from Grace. I wasn't delusional, and I didn't have to wait long to find out. As I walked through the crowd with Isla and Zoe by my side, the whispers began. Not so loud that they could be called out, but not so low that they went unnoticed either. From a group of girls dressed in careful layers of designer brands, with delicate heels clinking against the polished stone. "Blair, is that your grandma's goddaughter?" someone whispered. "She looks a lot like Eleanor. It's a little scary, to be honest. Is she wearing… what? Off the rack. I don't recognize a single brand. Why would your grandparents bring someone like that at their age? Especially when she's practically your mum's age. So weird." "Aside from looking like your grandma, she's pretty normal. I heard she and her family almost got turned away at the entrance. Were they invited or did they just show up? I swear, some people will do anything to cling to wealth. Maybe she had surgery to look like that. I've seen worse. She's not exactly young anymore, but those two daughters, they're pretty. If they play their cards right, maybe they'll use this connection to marry into someone else's money. A classic social climb." And just like that, everything clicked. This was Blair, the birthday girl, the princess of the night, determined to create an image, the elegant daughter, born into a legacy, who stands beside her mother, the poor, wronged woman whose rightful place has been threatened by a stranger who came out of nowhere. And so, what better accessory than the real daughter? Bring her in, dress her discreetly, keep her still, let the guests compare, let them see the difference, let them whisper about it, let them reaffirm Blair's status by mocking mine. It wasn't even subtle. This wasn't an olive branch, it was a stage. And I had just been cast in the supporting role of not good enough. But that's where they miscalculated, because I wasn't there to play their part. And I never needed their script to begin with. Just as we were passing through a garden path with marble columns, a group of kids, roughly my daughter's age, walked by. At the front was Leo, David's son, my biological nephew. Someone in the group nudged him and asked, loud enough for everyone around to hear, "Hey, Leo, are those your new aunt and cousins?" Leo didn't even try to be polite. He snorted, visibly irritated, and answered without hesitation. "I have one aunt and one cousin. That's it. I'm almost 55 years old. It's not often that a teenager whose voice probably still cracks when he shouts dismisses me publicly. But here we were. I could have ignored him. I've ignored worse things. But my daughters, they weren't raised for silence." Ela looked around, theatrically confused, then turned to Zoe. "Ugh! Do you hear that? Sounds like a dog barking. How noisy." Zoe didn't miss a beat. "Seriously, where are the owners? I can't have a dog barking at guests like that." The boys froze. Leo turned bright red. "Are you calling me a dog?" Isla smiled, her eyes wide and feigning innocence. "Well, I didn't say who I was talking about, but if the collar fits." Zoe snorted. "Damn! I've never seen anyone volunteer to be insulted." The whole exchange lasted less than 10 seconds and was a direct hit. Leo's face twisted with disbelief. He was clearly a boy who had grown up being treated with respect, praise, and deference, who wasn't used to being called out by anyone, especially not by girls who didn't shrink in fear at his last name. You're all very proud of yourselves, huh? He spat. Do you think you belong here? If it weren't for the Davenports, your family wouldn't even be allowed through the gate. He knew who I was. He knew the truth. But he still said it. Loud. Public. Meant to humiliate. And now, just like that, we had the public's attention. The whisperers turned again, heads tilted, eyes narrowed. Everyone was wondering what exactly we were doing there. If we were crashing a party we didn't deserve to be at. But this was where my daughters thrived. Isla's smile widened until it was all teeth. Really, sir? Well, the joke's on you, Leo. My mum might be competing with your dad for the inheritance one day. Zoe continued, in a sweet, syrupy voice. You seem really stressed about us, Leo. Are you afraid that Dad won't be able to hoard the whole Davenport pie anymore? And there it was. I hadn't understood until that moment why they insisted on coming tonight, why they didn't flinch once despite the tension. They weren't there to attend Blair's party. They were there to break the illusion. The Davenports could claim that I was simply a goddaughter, married, with adult children and no stake in their empire. But now the guests were wondering, what kind of relationship allows someone to compete for the inheritance? What kind of family drama is hidden behind the smiles and the wine? They had tried to relegate me to the background, but Ela and Zoe simply opened the curtain wide. The truth was that neither my daughters nor I cared about the Davenport fortune. But that didn't mean we wouldn't use it as ammunition. It turned out that stirring the pot was a family thing. Leo was barely in high school, young, spoiled, unchallenged. My daughters, on the other hand, were already in college. From day one, Sebastian and I raised them with the same principles we gave their brother: balance, discipline, and audacity. They could dance, code, speak 3 languages, and win an argument in 5 seconds. And no one their age, especially not Leo's, could match Ela in comebacks. Just as the situation was starting to get heated, a calm, practiced voice cut through the tension. "Aunt Michelle?" said the birthday girl's voice. Blair approached with the poise of someone trained for public appearances. She was flawless from head to toe, hair, makeup, posture, even the measured concern in her voice. Everything about her screamed Caldwell princess, down to the custom jewelry set that probably cost more than most people's cars. She stopped close enough to seem intimate, but not too warm. "Leo didn't mean what he said," she said softly. "For my sake, just let it go." Her tone said, "I'm keeping the peace." Her posture said, "Don't cause a scene at my party." I looked at her. She was a perfect girl, standing in her designer shoes, her head tilted slightly, and a soft smile. She was beautiful, elegant, and entirely performative. Blair, sensing my silence, tried again. "He's a brat. I know. The whole family is too indulgent with him. I'll apologize for him, okay?" She didn't get to finish. A sharp-featured, thin-lipped girl to her left, one of those who always smells blood in the water, interrupted her with a sneer. "Why are you apologizing?" she said, staring at me. "Some people just don't know their place and act like they own the place. No manners at all." "Lily, don't," Blair said quickly, her tone suddenly sharper. But the girl, Lily, wasn't done. She looked at me as if I were a product she didn't quite believe was authentic. "Seriously, is she really a Davenport goddaughter? Or is she just someone your grandfather couldn't keep a secret?" The words landed like a slap in the crowd, but before the silence could settle, someone whispered nearby. "Wait, but doesn't she look like Mrs. Davenport?" The implication changed instantly. It wasn't just that I looked like someone in the family. I looked exactly like Eleanor. And if it's not Benjamin's, well, there was only one female Davenport she could look like that. Blair's expression wavered. Lily visibly froze. Because suddenly their little narrative, that neat story about the awkward older woman they were trying to rebrand as a marginal relative, began to crack. I saw the understanding reflected in the faces of some guests. The kind of understanding that doesn't need to be confirmed to be believed. And worse, the kind of thing that can't be forgotten once the seed is planted. If I were Eleanor's secret daughter, what did that make Grace? What did that make Blair? What kind of scandal would that unleash? And just like that, the room fell into that kind of silence that you only get when everyone is thinking the exact same thing. What if the real heir isn't the one they've been applauding all night? Blair smiled again, her expression calm but fragile. Aunt Michelle, as I said, Leo crossed a line. I've already apologized for him. Can we just let it go? But Leo, clearly not a fan of being used as a tool for damage control, lost his temper before I could answer. I never apologized. Why should I? Is she the one barging in here trying to take things that don't belong to her? He pointed in my direction with a finger, and now his voice was louder. Loud enough to attract even more attention. And just like that, the temperature in the garden dropped again. Another girl, Lily, standing right behind Blair, narrowed her eyes and her lips curled with barely disguised disdain. Wait, taking things, she repeated. She's not seriously trying to claim something, is she? Her voice was inflected, the way people talk when they think they are exposing some ugly family secret. Is she really just a goddaughter, or is she, one of those? Everyone in their social circle knew what that meant. The illegitimate ones, the inconvenient ones, the mistakes, buried under the scandal of people who were supposed to know better. Blair gave her a tight-lipped, perfectly rehearsed smile. Of course not. She's my grandparents' goddaughter. Nothing more. But Lily wasn't done. Some random woman gets adopted in her 50s and suddenly starts thinking about an inheritance. How embarrassing! She must be broke. She said it laughing, as if it were a joke, as if I hadn't heard it before, and worse. Then, just as she was about to turn away, she looked at Blair and changed the subject without warning, as if she had already dismissed me. So, Blair, what about Reese? You said he was coming tonight, right? When? Blair's demeanor changed completely. Her anger disappeared, replaced by a sweet anticipation. It's not confirmed yet, but his agent responded and said he's going to try to come tonight. She leaned closer to Lily. You'll finally get a chance to meet him in person. I'll introduce you if you want. Lily's eyes lit up, her earlier hostility already forgotten. She practically squealed. Oh my God, Blair, you're the best. You know how obsessed I am. If only I could just talk to him. But I wasn't listening anymore, because now I remembered exactly who Lily was. Lily, the girl from the dinner conversation, the one the Caldwell family was interested in building connections with. Smart family, solid financial situation, and apparently very interested in Reese, which made all of this even more hilarious. Because my son, my savvy, handsome, and arrogant son, was notoriously picky. He barely attended business events. He spent most of his time between movie sets, live shows, and university lectures. He didn't need brand deals or strategic appearances. He had no interest in playing an industry puppet, and he certainly had no interest in arranged dates, especially not with girls like Lily. His fans adored him, especially the younger ones. Isla and Zoe, those two little arsonists, still hadn't calmed down. Now they spoke again, clear, unconcerned, and loud enough for the crowd around them to catch every word. Yeah, Isla said with a cheerful smile. Our mum is that goddaughter, the one the Davenports had to resort to the police to find. Zoe nodded, picking up where her sister had left off. She didn't show up begging for handouts, she was dragged back. It was a whole family affair. So that's what it was all about. The goddaughter angle. When Benjamin first suggested it, to claim I was spiritually adopted instead of acknowledging me as the flesh and blood daughter he and Eleanor had lost, I didn't agree. I didn't argue either. I just didn't care enough to correct them. But my daughters had been listening, and they had been waiting. Now they were taking every card off the table and throwing them into the open, no matter how messy it looked. And finally the noise reached the hosts. Grace and Nathaniel made their way over. They weren't in a hurry, but their steps had exactly that kind of social urgency, the kind that people use when they've just realized a public relations problem might be unfolding in their front yard. Grace played her part first, of course. Soft voice, compassionate eyes. Nathaniel was slightly behind her, his eyes scanning the crowd, calculating who had heard what, who was watching, who might report this to influential people. When he heard the details, specifically, that I was allowing my daughters to talk like this, his mask broke. "This is not the Davenport estate," he said coldly. "No one here is going to tolerate this kind of disturbance. If you or your daughters continue to behave like this, I will have your entire family escorted out." There was the threat, being thrown out of a high-profile social event like this. Not only would it be embarrassing, it would be remembered. That kind of stain would follow you in social circles for years. But I didn't answer, because while Nathaniel was throwing out warning signs, I was looking at the man standing right behind him. One of the vice presidents of Apex Global, an executive who is currently negotiating with the Caldwell family. He recognized me instantly, and the look on his face said it all. His eyes darted towards me. Then, when Nathaniel said the words, "escort them out," the man took a silent but deliberate step back, just enough to suggest he had no idea who I was. Professional survival instincts. He didn't want to be on the wrong side of the conversation. Grace stepped in, eager to mediate. "Nate," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm, "don't go too far. It's better to just let it go. For my parents' sake, don't embarrass them tonight." Her tone was calming, but her eyes weren't on me. They were on the guests, on the donors, on the clients, and the growing sense that this party was slipping out of her control. Nathaniel wasn't willing to accept it. If the Davenports want to have tantrums, that's their decision. But this is a Caldwell event, and if there's one more outburst, I'll have them thrown out, goddaughters or not. Then, Isla struck again, louder this time, fearless, unfiltered. "We didn't start anything," she retorted. "They were talking bad about us behind our backs, and then had the nerve to say it to our faces. That's not class. It's just being desperate for a slap in the face." She narrowed her eyes and looked at Nathaniel. "You invited us. Now you want us to leave because your guests are getting indiscreet and can't handle the consequences. That's not etiquette, it's cowardice." The crowd around us was paralyzed, their gazes moving between us as if in a tennis match, not knowing if they were witnessing a scandal or the start of something much bigger. Nathaniel's expression hardened into something sharp and final. He turned to the staff nearby and gave the order. "Escort them out." A single phrase, "escort them out," and I saw it, the flash of satisfaction on too many faces. Blair, Leo, their little circle of trust fund kids. Even Grace, who just moments before had played the role of peacemaker, stood still, not pretending to intervene. From the second-floor balcony, I could see David and his wife watching everything as they both observed with mocking smiles as it all unfolded. spectators at a public stoning. And my supposed parents? I didn't even know if they were here. Maybe it was a blessing. I smiled, not mockingly, not with rage, just calm, measured, and final. "We're leaving," I said. Isla and Zoe didn't protest. The claws retracted into my body and were replaced by the same steel I felt tightening in my chest. They snorted in unison and followed suit, but we hadn't gotten far before. "Ma'am, please wait." The voice cut through the party chatter with clarity, loud enough to silence everything around us. People turned, and there, pushing his way through the crowd in a torrent of anxious apologies, was Pierce, one of the regional vice presidents of Apex Global. He wasn't just a guest, he was my subordinate. "Ma'am," he reached me, out of breath. "I'm just in town for a little while for work. I was invited at the last minute. I had no idea there would be this." He didn't know what. He looked back and saw Nathaniel and Grace approaching. Before he could speak, Nathaniel's voice sounded, sharp and confused. "Pierce, what did you call her?" Pierce blinked, then frowned slightly, as if he couldn't understand why Nathaniel was asking such a silly question. He took a step away from them, clearly and deliberately, and spoke loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Caldwell, she is Michelle Covington, the founder and current chairman of Apex Global. Are you trying to secure a partnership with us, and then you try to kick out our CEO in front of 100 witnesses?" The silence that followed was brutal. A pin could have dropped, and people 3 rooms away would have heard it. And all around us, faces turned pale, eyes widened, drinks lowered. Suddenly, everyone realized they had been applauding the public humiliation of a woman who owned half of the future their parents were trying to buy. Pierce wasn't finished. "I'm leaving," he said dryly. "This is clearly not a place where our leadership is respected. And as for that collaboration..." He paused just long enough to let it sink in. "Consider it dead." Then he turned to me and his tone changed completely. "Ma'am, your car is ready. Shall I walk you out?" And just like that, the entire room reorganized their understanding of who Michelle Cavington was. I was no longer the goddaughter. I was no longer the outsider. I was no longer the woman they thought they could ignore. I nodded. "Let's go." "She's the owner of Apex Global?" Nathaniel's voice cracked with disbelief. "That's not possible." "Why not?" Pierce responded coldly. "She's been at the helm for over 2 decades. The silence in the room had turned into a dull roar of stunned whispers and recalculations. Grace and Blair looked as if someone had tipped their world over and spilled everything onto the floor, their mouths slightly open, eyes unfocused. Disbelief reflected in their carefully selected expressions. And while they stood there struggling to find the logic, the sharks in the room smelled blood, but not mine. "Mrs. Cavington, a pleasure. I've been following your work for years," a well-dressed man said, offering me his card. "If you're up for coffee next week." "Ma'am," another chimed in, pushing his way past a paralyzed Nathaniel. "We're in the middle of a Series B funding round and we'd be honored to have your opinion." Their voices began to overlap. I caught a few fragments. "She's not some white-collar nobody. Why would a woman like that need to be anyone's goddaughter?" The Davenport family had stumbled a lot. I had no interest in staying there to soak up the irony. I scanned the crowd, looking for Sebastian. He had probably found a glass of wine and a corner from which to watch the chaos, discreetly amused. "It's time to go." But before I could move, a new wave of noise rose from the entrance. High heels stopped, glasses were raised in the air, some people even gasped. "RHYS," someone squealed. "Why is he here?" The Caldwell family really pulled out all the stops, another murmured. RHYS almost never does private events. He's even more handsome in person, my God. That face has to be natural, right? Of course it is. We've watched him grow up on camera since he was a kid. He's always been a star. I watched as the young man who had just entered paused briefly at the door, his gaze scanning the room in a deliberate search for something or someone. But before he could fix on his target, a crowd had already begun to form around him, mostly young women. He was young. He had debuted early. His fan base, it's full of mums. I saw them online all the time, mums, who gushed about him as if he were their biological son. Just moments ago, several of those young women were behind me. Now they had pushed past me without hesitation, including Blair and the girl who had asked about him earlier. RHYS. I'm your fan. I'm Lily. I went to your concert a few days ago. I watched my son as his gaze settled on the excitable girl. He observed her for a moment and then spoke with polite surprise. Were you the one in the front row with the rainbow dress? The one who was on the big screen? Yes, that was me. Do you remember? Her voice was trembling with excitement, her eyes already shining. She quickly asked if he would be willing to take a picture with her. Technically speaking, he had no obligation to take pictures during private events like this, but most celebrities, especially the more refined ones, knew how to handle moments like this. RHYS looked around, clearly gauging the mood. The moment felt a little off, as if the energy had shifted from celebration to spectacle. Then Blair intervened. Hi, RHYS, I'm Blair. I sent you the invitation. My friend is a huge fan. She'd be thrilled if you'd take a picture with her. His gaze shifted to Blair, and I could see the moment he connected the dots, recognizing her not only as the hostess, but as Blair Caldwell. With the calm and poise that his years in the spotlight gave him, he offered a polite nod. Miss Caldwell, happy birthday. Then finally his eyes lifted, past the crowd, past the flashes and the noise, and landed directly on me and his two sisters. Having a celebrity in the family comes with a few minor inconveniences. For example, when we go out with RHYS, or my sister-in-law, we also have to go incognito, hats, masks, the whole get-up. Over the years, despite being family to a public figure, our personal information has remained largely private. But it's not like no one knows. It's not a secret, just something we don't flaunt. Still, under the spotlight of this event, with all eyes already on him, RHYS casually shouted in my direction. Mom. When it comes to staging a scene, my son is no less effective than my daughters. He had been invited tonight with a fee, but he hadn't accepted a single cent. He just wanted to come. I had no idea what those three were plotting in private. But what I did know was that now everyone was looking at us again. Their expressions said it all. Who in that direction would a star like RHYS call Mom? Then the young man, so dazzling he almost didn't seem real, began to walk. He passed by the crowd, past the whispers and the guests, still frozen, and stopped gently right in front of me and my daughters. Mum, that word again, this time face to face. It unleashed a second wave of disbelief, especially from Lily. Just moments ago, she had called herself his biggest fan, and she clearly remembered all the things she had just said to me in defense of Blair. Her face turned paper white. RHYS seemed to finally realize he wasn't alone. Mr. Pierce, you're here too? He used to visit the office with me when he was little. Some of the senior executives still remembered those days. Mr. Pierce smiled. Did you just finish your tour? RHYS. RHYS nodded. And then, thanks. She pointed at him, her expression stunned and her voice sharp. Is that your son? I thought your son was out there working. I nodded, calm as ever. Yes, he works in an entertainment company. He is working. That part wasn't a lie. And just like that, suddenly, even the couple who had been quietly watching from the second floor, David and his wife, managed to come down. Now that the crowd knew who I really was, the owner of Apex Global, the reactions shifted from suspicion to disbelief, especially from those who shared my blood. David pushed his way through the guests and moved to the front of the crowd, his usual arrogance noticeably gone. He seemed uncomfortable. Did you deliberately hide this from us, just waiting to see us embarrass ourselves? I tilted my head, amused. I already told you I'm not missing anything. I shrugged slightly. It's not my fault no one believed me. Weren't you the one who assumed I must be living a tragic and pathetic life? David's lips parted and then closed again. No words. Then, Michelle. Sebastian's voice interrupted me from behind. He appeared accompanied by several senior executives who saw me and came over to greet me warmly. Michelle, it's been too long. And right at that moment, the three kids next to me, as calm and serene as ever, looked at him and said in unison, Dad. With just that word, Sebastian's identity was exposed. He wasn't just my husband, he was their father. Then someone in the crowd recognized Isla and Zoe, and their voice rang out with that unmistakable tone of pride. These two must be your daughters? My son started college this year, in fact. He's their classmate. He also went to the same high school. Although he's not at their level, he got in through the regular admissions process. Your daughters were in the news when they were accepted, right? The speaker was a well-known businessman who had recently hosted a big celebration for his son's acceptance into a major US university. Another guest, half amazed, half disbelieving, asked out loud, Wait, they're already in college? That same executive nodded proudly, as if they were his own. Top-tier twins, geniuses. And not long ago, Linda, David's wife, was the one who had so smugly suggested that my daughters might not be able to keep up with her son's school. Her face had turned completely pale. What a masterful social demolition. Sebastian leaned in beside me and asked in a low voice, What happened? I simply replied, Let's go. It's clear we're not welcome here. So we left, our family of 5, calm and unconcerned. My subordinates followed us too. And the hosts? Nathaniel and his family had no reason to ask us to stay, not after they had ordered us to leave themselves. But the damage was already done. The Caldwell's little coming-of-age show had turned into a public mess. In elite circles, there are no well-kept secrets. The gossip started to spread, first in whispers, then in waves. My resemblance to Eleanor was too obvious. And Grace? Not so much. Her features barely had a trace of the Davenport marriage. Ironically, the same people who tried to tarnish my reputation ended up doing me a favor. They publicly shared how I rejected the compensation, the meager $1 million Eleanor offered me. Before the truth was known, most assumed the goddaughter was just another gold digger. After? They laughed. $1 million? That doesn't even cover what her kids spend at auctions. To call that reparation for your biological daughter, what a joke. The funniest part, she didn't even want the money. If I had a daughter like that, a successful husband, brilliant kids, I'd put her on a pedestal. But not the Davenports. They act as if she's here to steal from them. So Grace isn't their daughter? She took someone's life for more than 50 years? If I were the real one, I'd be disgusted just seeing her. What's even dumber is that if they had found her sooner or hadn't switched the kids, the marriage with Caldwell would have been with her. Imagine having the CEO of Apex Global as your in-law. Now they don't have to beg for partnerships. Partnership? Please. No one at Apex bothers to acknowledge them anymore. And as for Lily, she completely cut ties with Blair after the party. She realized too late that she had been used, pointed like a weapon at the mother and sisters of the celebrity she liked. And the worst of it all, the ones who looked the dumbest. They were the Davenports and Caldwells themselves. Their pride, their prejudices, and their desperate need to protect appearances. It had turned them into high society's latest joke. The rumours, the gossip, the social consequences, it all eventually reached me and Sebastian, of course. But to be honest, we barely noticed, because our weekend was filled with a much louder soundtrack. Mom, mom, mom. Dad, dad, dad. All from 3 adult, chaotic, and absolutely unrepentant children. It was the weekend, and for once the 5 of us had the day off. No classes, no shoots, no meetings. And when 3 adult-sized humans are jumping around your house screaming at each other to get your attention, you start to consider drastic solutions. Like Sebastian turning to me and saying, "Could we book a hotel room? Just for the silence?" God, we had become that kind of old couple, dreaming of peace and privacy in a 5-star suite 30 minutes from our own home. But no, our kids were clingy, funny, annoyingly adorable, and this chaos was ours. Meanwhile, the Davenports had been trying to get in touch with me relentlessly. Now that the world knew who I was, finding out who Sebastian was had been easy for them. After all, when I met him, he was already rich, and what he had built in the last 2 decades only made the contrast between us and the Davenports that much sharper. It's funny, isn't it? They were so invested in me playing the goddaughter. But now, they largely sat back and said nothing, while rumours ran rampant that Grace was a fraud. Now they wanted a meeting. A formal apology, they said, from the younger generation who had spoken out of turn. But let's be honest, were they really the only ones who crossed the line? Where do you think those kids learned to scoff and spit poison? It wasn't just their own invention. They had role models. Still, I agreed to meet, out of curiosity, for closure. And this time I didn't go alone. Sebastian came with me. No kids, just husband and wife. 2 people who built a life that no one in that family would have ever expected. I listened to the apologies from Blair and Leo, each delivered with all the theatrical sincerity of an actor in a high school play. My expression didn't change. Yes, the younger generation had clearly never learned how to show basic respect. But who was really responsible for this? They didn't come out of the womb scoffing. Still, the tone of the entire Davenport family had changed. The veiled contempt and condescending looks were gone. Now they were polite. Respectful, even. And then Benjamin, my biological father, finally mentioned what they should have said from the beginning. Shares. Of course he did, because now they knew. I had no need to covet the Davenport family business. I had Apex Global. I had Sebastian. I had the power to destroy them or elevate them with a single word. Giving me a share of their company wasn't a noble gesture. It was a strategic alliance that allowed them to maintain their image and gain access to the right circles. David, for once, kept his mouth shut. He knew the truth. The empire they had built him could not match the one I had built from scratch. Let's be honest. If I had been raised as this family's legitimate daughter, there would be no question about the inheritance. David wouldn't even be in the running. That reality clearly hurt. And then Benjamin had the nerve to say, "Michelle, I know you must still hold resentment. It was our failure as parents that left you adrift for so many years. You don't like Grace, and we understand that. But she is also innocent in all of this." "Ah, innocent. Good." Eleanor chimed in immediately, almost as if they had rehearsed it. "Yes, Michelle, you have to understand us. Both the front and back of the hand are flesh. Grace may not be blood, but she is our daughter, too." Of course, she is. They raised her. I've seen her flourish, using a life that should have been mine. And now they wanted me to understand, to empathize, to allow them to keep both daughters, both legacies, both faces, without ever paying the true price of what they took from me. Because at the end of the day, they still couldn't let go of the daughter they bought with my life. As soon as Sebastian started to speak, his tone was calm, almost professional. "I have some documents here. You might want to take a look at them before we continue." He handed him a folder. Benjamin took it and opened it with the slight curiosity of someone who thinks they've seen it all. He hadn't. Sebastian waited until they had the contents in their hands and then continued. "I found this information by chance. What you have in your hands are selected records of Grace's bank transactions. According to these, she started sending money to an account since she was 18 years old. A few years later, around the same time she got married, she switched to an overseas account. The recipient? A woman named Hannah Smith." He paused and then added, "That is, Grace's biological mother." The silence in the room was almost physical. Grace's face froze. Her husband looked at him bewildered. Her daughter, equally stunned. But the real impact fell on Benjamin and Eleanor. They were staring at the pages in their hands as if the paper was about to catch fire. 30 years of deception, Sebastian concluded, without raising his voice. "So I think it's fair to say that your adopted daughter may have known the truth all along, since she was 18 at the latest. She didn't tell you. Instead, she funneled money to her biological mother for 3 decades. Grace jumped to her feet, losing her composure. "That's slander. You're lying. You're conspiring to ruin me." Her voice was sharp and brittle. But I just looked at her, and then at the 2 people who once called her daughter, with the same calm I'd had from the beginning. "If you think we falsified the documents, you can investigate. Have your people verify every detail. If I've lied, I'll apologize publicly." Then I tilted my head, and my voice was soft but cutting. "But if I haven't lied, when you found out I was alive, what was the first thing you felt, Grace? Was it guilt? Or was it anger that your mother failed at her job? That she wasn't even able to kill a baby properly?" Grace's lips trembled. "You..." But she couldn't finish the sentence. Because she saw what I saw, doubt, in the eyes of the people who raised her. It shattered her. She turned to them, her eyes moist, whispering like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. "Dad, Mom, you don't believe it. They're fake. They have to be. I didn't stay to watch the rest of the show. I didn't need to. I no longer cared whether they believed her or not." I stood up. Sebastian stood with me. Without another word, we left. Under the weight of undeniable evidence, even the most convincing performance crumbles into dust. Once the idea took root that the child they raised might not be theirs, finding me would have been easy. My records had always been accessible. Benjamin and Eleanor, the two remaining decision-makers in the Davenport family, admitted that if they had brought me home when I was 18, our relationship might have been salvageable. They weren't wrong. If I had still been a teenager, maybe they would have invested time and money in cultivating a bond, especially an emotional one. But back then, I still had my adoptive parents. I would never have abandoned them. When confronted, Grace finally stopped denying it. She cried. Oh, how she cried, and described in detail how her biological mother had told her the truth when she was 18, that the true Davenport daughter had supposedly died. Was she scared? Scared of losing the life she had lived, scared of being rejected, so she said nothing. Her excuse? That she had been blackmailed into sending money all these years. But what difference did it make? She kept that secret for 36 years, and once the lie broke, everything else came crashing down too. Grace's situation in the Davenport family became awkward. Her formerly proud daughter now had to live with the shame of her mother's decisions. And then came the next blow. Nathaniel had a mistress. And kids. Yes, plural. Grace's dear only daughter was no longer the only one, not even the only girl. When the Davenports backed her, the Caldwells tolerated everything. But now they were testing the limits. Grace couldn't afford to lose her position as Mrs. Caldwell. There were fights, but never real fury, because she no longer had any influence. Nathaniel, as expected, looked down on a wife without a name or status, and blamed her for the string of failed businesses. I heard that, when drunk, he once bitterly ranted that his wife should have been a powerful figure, a queen in heels, a commanding presence in the boardroom. How ironic. Because any woman with real power would have destroyed a cheating husband for less. As for the Davenports, they started calling, sending messages, trying to rebuild something, anything. But what is lost is lost. The first impressions they left were deep, and I saw no need to pretend we could reverse them. Not now. David, bless his heart, finally remembered that I was his blood sister. He tried to leverage it. He hoped Apex Global would lend him a hand, that I would open a door for him, that I would offer him a deal. Hilarious. He must have mistaken Sebastian and me for idiots. Davenport Inc. was already stumbling. The decline was inevitable, unless someone with a real sense of the market stepped in. But David was never that person. Finally, we left that city. We still had properties there, but there was no reason to stay. The reunification thing? Done. Our son went back to the chaos of show business. Our daughters went back to their studies. Sebastian and I, we still had fire in our blood. So we worked. We built. We grew. Conveniently, a meme was going viral online. 50s, that's the ideal age for success. Our daughters, always connected, sent it to the family group chat. Motivation for our badass parents and workaholic aunt. To which their aunt quickly replied in the middle of the night, "Please, stop, you're exhausting me." Bonus story, high school years. I had this classmate. Excellent grades, a little spoiled. A handsome kid, with beautiful handwriting, who the teachers praised more than the answers themselves. But I didn't like him much. He was popular, too popular. Sometimes he would just go to the bathroom, and when he came back, one of his friends would be comfortably sitting in my seat, chatting with him as if he owned the row. At some point, he must have noticed my growing irritation. After that, whenever his friends came over, he would just get up and go talk to them somewhere else. Another thing, his grades. Every time my name appeared right below his on the leaderboard, he would clench his teeth and swear silently, "Next time, I'll beat him." Why be number one? It feels amazing. After a particularly painful second place, I was looking at my incorrect answers in deep introspection when Sebastian, that same annoyingly perfect deskmate, leaned over and said, "Michelle, I can walk you through this if you want." Oh, he was challenging me. I finally got first place. I gave a casual glance at his paper, smug and triumphant, and replied, "Do you need me to explain anything this time?" He looked at me, completely sincere, and said, "Thanks." According to Sebastian himself, he thought we were soulmates back then, mutual respect, academic rivals, maybe even friends. Seriously, I would go home and vent like a volcano to my parents. My deskmate is constantly trying to provoke me. My mum sighed. My dad muttered quietly, "Don't let him get to you. That will prevent her from dating too soon."